Hello, and I think good afternoon to Yancy. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Here in New York, it is actually still morning, but I'm doing great.
Absolutely. I was going to say, we are through the wonderful world of virtual streaming. We're allowed to beam live to New York. I'm always privileged to be able to speak to senior trade show and exhibition professionals around the globe. So thank you for joining us today. So, Yancy, before we talk about all things CloserStill Media and the wider trade show and exhibition industry, always keen to understand a little bit about the guest that's sitting in front of me. I guess roll all the way back as far as you want to. When do you think you first thought, actually, the events industry might be something that I could consider as a career?
That is a great question. Well, I started over 20 years ago, around about 20 years ago, but I was an exhibitor at a trade show in the jewelry industry. And the jewelry industry, as large and as glamorous as it is a lot of very small businesses. And I thought an opportunity came up on the jewelry show that I was exhibiting at to sell. And I thought, well, this is interesting. I can kind of stay in the jewelry industry, but I can learn the event and the trade show industry. And from day one, I had the bug. I just loved the fast pace, loved helping exhibitors grow their businesses and give them opportunities on the backs of our platforms, loved getting to know small to medium sized businesses and entrepreneurial people that were trying to grow and using our platforms and shows to do that. So
Sure.
I've been doing it for a long time, and like I said, started out in sales.
Yeah, absolutely. And interestingly enough, you mentioned the jewellery show. Closer Still Media, if I'm not mistaken, now have a jewellery event, right? Because
They do.
I
Long story, the industry's small, right? The trade show industry is small, but Reed, where we used to be, or RX as
yeah,
it's known now, had a small jewelry show in London.
yeah,
And I believe Reed, I never worked on that show, but Reed closed that one down over the
yeah.
pandemic, and Closer Still picked it up before I joined Closer Still. So no connection to me, but yes, it's running and it's doing very well from what I hear.
Yeah, because I actually had Lennox, the event director, on the show, coincidentally, and he just reminded me a couple of years ago. Actually, I think after the first edition, post the pandemic.
Yeah.
So
Lennox is great,
yeah,
full of energy, perfect for that industry. I think he worked at Reed on that jewelry
yeah,
show,
he
if I'm
did,
not mistaken.
he
So
did.
yeah, yeah,
Well, it's
he's great.
interesting because actually the pandemic that wasn't the only show, right? That for whatever reason was going to move on or close, and there was a lot of sort of swapping hands, and people that worked on the show gave them an opportunity to maybe be a bit entrepreneurial and launch it themselves, either by themselves or with another company. So I guess that was one of the benefits of the pandemic. Let me try and take you back a little bit further, Yancy, because some of my guests say, they always thought there might be an event because they were organising parties or had Enrico Gallerini from GRS Research and Strategy, larger than life Italian character, who used to say loved events because he was always at family do's. They were big occasions. Anything like that happen to you from an events perspective?
No, as a matter of fact, probably the exact opposite. I'm an introvert by
Ah,
nature.
okay.
Yeah, which is an interesting thing in the events world, right?
Sure.
And I moved 13 times in my life before I graduated high school. My parents
Ah,
moved, I should say.
right.
So I learned how to enter new situations, new environments,
Sure.
meet people through all of that upbringing.
Yeah.
And so I think that helped me with the events business is I can walk into any room and kind of find my way,
Yeah.
find a couple friendly
Yeah.
faces and get to know them. I'm
Yeah.
a relationship driven person. So that kind of drove me to it. And I think there's many of us sort of secret introverts in the event industry. And as much as we have to be on while we're at the event, we need to go back to our hotel room at night and sort of regather ourselves, and then we could go out and be
Yeah.
on again.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's like putting on a show, isn't it? You've got to be on your
exactly,
game. So yeah, okay. So
yeah.
your background of moving a lot, and I think that's quite typical. If I'm not mistaken, I've worked in America with Americans generally. They don't mind sort of hopping states, whether it's for personal or career. In I can only speak for myself in the UK. A lot of people tend to stay not quite near from where they are. Would you say that's a sort of American trait?
I don't know. There's not a lot of people that there's most people that I tell in the U.S. that I moved 13 times before I graduated high school are pretty shocked. So I
Right.
don't think that's normal,
Okay.
but I don't think hopping states is
Sure.
abnormal. I mean, we don't have the language barriers. We don't have, we
True.
don't have, like the things that Europe is faced with.
Sure. So you spent the good chunk of 17, 18 years at Reed. So I want to touch upon that time. And actually, one thing that sort of resonates, because I was reading, in this day and age, I don't know whether it's Gen Z, millennials, I've lost track of all the different types, but there's a lot of, go and experience different companies. And, these days when you look at a CV, it's not the end of the world if someone's had 5 jobs in 7 years. Back in my day, that was frowned upon. But you stuck it out. I'm interested to know, I guess, obviously you would have enjoyed it, but what do you think the benefits were of being at a company for that period of time?
I loved my job. I loved, like I said, I started on jewelry, and then, I don't know, 8 or 9 years in, I expanded and I took on the PGA show and then the Vision show. And by the time I left, I had all a B2B portfolio
Right.
underneath me. And every time I thought, oh, this might be getting stale, I was given more opportunity and I was learning more. The other thing about Reed is its culture was, and still is, I haven't been there in several years, but is amazing. And the people that you meet and the relationships that you make and their shows that they have are, market leading shows. So you feel very proud to be working on those shows. It's a machine. I learned strategy. We had centralized marketing, centralized ops. We didn't centralize sales, but there was so much every time you turned around that was changing, and I was learning the entire time. So there was never a thought to leave until the pandemic. And also I had, at that point, was sort of number 2 underneath the president, Fernando, thinking, what's the next step in my career? So I people came and went, but I was enjoying every minute of it.
So there's a lesson there. I like this sort of show, I guess, to be educational. People listening, the grass isn't always greener, I guess. And, as long as you're at a company that is giving you opportunities, and we can come to that because, you run a business, and that's important as well, isn't it? To make sure that you keep giving people opportunities, because it's a big cost to keep replacing people, right?
Absolutely. When I was young, way before I was in the events business, but younger, I should say, the best piece of advice I got in my career was be patient in your career. And I didn't know what that meant at the time, but the more you stick it out, the more opportunities just keep coming your way, sort of being in the right place at the right time. But people are also looking at you and mentoring you and developing you and looking, in big organizations, and there's changes all the time.
Sure. I think that's good advice. Okay, so, we obviously just done a very whirlwind tour of your 17, 18 years at Reed, but do want to get on and talk about more present day. And you said, the pandemic came. Don't want to do a big deep dive into that. We understand what that did for a lot of people, but it gave you opportunity. Out of that came an opportunity. Talk to me about, because I have read an interview of, I think, when you first started CloserStill Media. These are my words, sort of taking yours, that you said you didn't know too much about CloserStill at the time, which is interesting because I used to work there. And when you work somewhere, you think everyone knows about everything, everything you're doing. So sometimes the world's small and big. Talk to me about how that developed, what excited you about joining the role, and then we're going to talk about what you've been up to since you joined.
I'll start with, I do want to say one thing about COVID. COVID was 5 years ago.
That's true.
So I know we talk, right? It's really puts it in perspective when you say it was 5 years ago. And I know we talk about it like it was yesterday, but it was 5 years ago. And it really redefined us, obviously, as an industry, but also personally, it affected all of us, right? So yes, I didn't know anything about CloserStill. And as I reflect on where CloserStill was when I joined almost 3 years ago, it was a very well-known company in the UK or in Europe, as you say, but not a global company. And I think since I've been here, we've gone from 400 to 800 employees. We are less than half of our employees in the UK now. We're in Germany, Spain, US, France. And so we've really become a globally recognized company. And we've achieved really great things. We've done quite a bit of acquisition. We've had double-digit organic growth. But as we've grown and scaled really quickly, we've also needed to make investments in structure and systems and efficiencies and training and developing our people. And what are we all about? And we've really become a group. We have more work to do, but we've really become a pretty cohesive group that we're fast-paced, we're energized, and bringing all these different businesses into our business is never easy, but we're investing in it and we're focused on it and we're making it a priority.
Sure. And I guess when you sit down, it's day one, if you cast your mind back. And again, we're beginning of the year. A lot of people will be starting new jobs at the moment, right? And panicking.
Yeah.
having imposter syndrome. I don't care how senior you are. Sometimes the more senior you are, new business, especially
Yeah.
yourself, you've come from 17 years at somewhere, that even though you had lots of different roles. What were you thinking? How do you go about thinking, right, this is my brief?
Yeah.
What do you do?
You know, hindsight's always 2020,
Yeah,
right? I didn't know what I didn't know, but what the most eye-opening has been for me is when I came into the US business, we were three very separate siloed businesses with no leader and no cohesiveness. And I have been focused on bringing the group together. We're about 100 employees. We've actually acquired another group since I've been here, so we're 4 portfolios.
sure.
But doing things like I said, we were very siloed, but doing things like creating a summer outing for all the people that are in New York, doing an annual holiday party, doing an annual town hall, creating a centralized operations department. And what the big aha for me was coming out of Reed, as I mentioned up front. Reed is a machine, and I mean that in every respectful way. They are so buttoned up and so organized. This was and continues to be a build. This is very entrepreneurial.
Yeah.
It's about building. It's like having your own little business here and trying to figure out how we're going to scale, make it efficient and continue to acquire and grow organically. So it goes back to kind of my roots. Years ago, I had a fitness studio, and it was my own fitness studio, and it was building, and I was entrepreneurial, which is, I think, what Gareth probably latched onto. Not that I had a fitness studio, but I was entrepreneurial by nature. And CloserStill, if you've worked there, they started as an entrepreneurial business, right? So that's been really exciting, kind of digging back into that, figuring it out, being entrepreneurial and building.
Yeah. Interesting that you then drew on experience, which was, I guess, many years ago, and actually not necessarily related to the industry. Again, a bit of learning there. You might be doing something today, which in a few years' time you can draw on. You might think, oh, this is not what I want to do, or I'm not enjoying it, or why am I doing this? But actually, in 10 or 15 years' time, it gives you, you can draw on that. Can you talk us about the markets that you're currently in North America, and maybe how they've developed over the period of time that you've been there?
Yeah, so I'll start with, CloserStill is really a very focused group, and we are focused in 3 portfolios. We have business technologies, healthcare, to include both human and animal, and we've got transportation and infrastructure. It's a mouthful. Transport and infrastructure. And so, excuse me, we really look to grow and acquire businesses that fit within those portfolios. Will we add a 4th portfolio a couple years down the road? Probably, if it's the right portfolio, but those buckets that we have are wide enough, broad enough that we can fit things into those buckets, but we want to stay focused. It helps us with creating efficiencies, career paths. It helps us, we're private equity backed, staying focused, helps us when we go to sell and all of those things. We're very diligent about that.
Yeah. And there's always this toss up between growing organically or growing acquisitively, and sometimes it's easy to think, oh, there's a show over there. If I just buy it and put it into the current show, that's going to catapult us and it's going to be very easy. How do you go about making those decisions? Because you are PE back, there are targets, I guess, to have. Yeah, when you're having those conversations, what's the sort of strategy behind how you decide?
So I feel like I've already used the word focus. So we're pretty, myopically looking at the US this year and for an acquisition. And there's several things out there, but we're not likely to go into a B2C event, a consumer event, something that's a pure retail play. I mean, if it's technology focused, we would be there because business technologies, but we really want industries that are growing and are the future. So we have weekly meetings. We've got a pipeline that's pretty long. We've got a couple things that we're digging into deeper, but they must fit within what we're doing. And then the other really important thing about buying property is the team, right? What are the team like? Are they going to fit with CloserStill? Are they entrepreneurial? Are they determined? Are they self-sufficient? Are they, because we're going to buy the whole team. We're not going to buy them and plug them into a machine like Reed. And I don't, again, in all the respectful ways, just different ways of doing business. And so we need to make sure that the team works. So, and the people.
Yeah, interesting. And I mean, since the pandemic, definitely the last 2 years, has been a plethora of M&A activity. Typically the same 5 or 6 companies. From an outsider looking in, it's like, right, it's just who gets to this one first. Doesn't always look like
I
it's
know.
fitting into a strategy. So sometimes I guess you have to be opportunistic and maybe take a defensive position that, we're going to take this before maybe someone else does. Do you see that continuing, that pace of M&A over the next 12, 24 months?
I mean, if you ask the brokers and you ask, the people that are leading these M&A efforts, yeah, they think it's going to be opening up even more this year, and the trend will continue. Yeah.
Interesting. And what about sort of the continual interest from private equity? Because again, that never existed up until 15, 20
I
years
know.
ago. And
I
now
know.
it's everywhere within the industry.
I
See that continuing?
Yeah, I think I think they've become really interested in the space. I mean, if you think about it, it's recurring revenue, it's an annuity,
Yeah.
it's high margin. So it's, a really good fit for private equity, and more private equity seems to be entering the space, to your point. So yeah, I think that interest continues.
Sure. If I was to ask you as a leader, what's the one or two or three things that, from a professional perspective, keep you up at night at the moment? So, you're sitting at your desk. It's the beginning of the new year. It's a time for reflection and think about what we're going to do. What would you say to me? What are the key challenges that you're thinking about at the moment?
I think about talent a lot. I think we're in a better place in the US that we're known now. And so it's not, people aren't feeling like, who am I joining this little small group called CloserStill? I think we're very well known. I think we've made our mark in the US. So talent acquisition is becoming a little bit easier. The other thing I think about is in the US, 75% of our shows are Q4.
Right.
And so if we're not, or if something should happen and we're not pacing to hit our numbers, or whatever may happen, there's very little room or runway at the end of the year to make that up. So I'm thinking about what can we do at the first half of the year to mitigate or de-risk should something happen at the end of the year. So I'm thinking about costs. I'm thinking about 3 years from now, how does AI play into our strategies?
Yeah.
I think I haven't heard that anyone has figured out how AI is going to help us drive revenue, although I know there's got to be an unlock in there for us to make driving revenue easier.
Yeah.
I think about audience development. How are we getting younger people to our shows? How are we getting them excited? What I have realized being at CloserStill is that, these younger people like to come to smaller events, and smaller, I mean 4,000 or 5,000 people, not 20,000 people.
Yeah.
That are 2 days. They're in and out. And they're adding a leisure piece to their business travel. And there's a new term, be leisure, business and leisure together. And that's how we're going to get them. But how do we find them, and how do we get them engaged with our brands when they've never heard of us? And so how do we find the marketers that can appeal to the new audiences? So I think about audience development.
And I guess on that tip as well, there's been lots of talk about festivalization of events to make them, I guess, maybe more like consumer shows are, but obviously for the trade show industry, if that makes sense. And to do that, as you say, getting a generation of marketeers that understand how to put those types of events on. Is that something you've been doing more of?
So it depends on the property. A couple of our shows. So we run a vet show. Obviously, CloserStill was founded on their London vet show, and we have a New York vet show, and we have a vet show out in Reno, Wild West vet show.
Yeah.
Those groups are younger people that are introverted, that are hard to come out of their shell. So yes, we think a lot about how to create activity, experience, activations that are going to get them to network with each other. Yeah, and we invest in that. Corporate learning and development, which is under our business technology portfolio, a bit of the same. It's a little bit of an older crowd, again, introverted, but this year we saw, I'll call it the 30-somethings coming to the show, not in great numbers, but the ones that were there, we thought there's something there, and how do we get them out of their shell? So yeah, we are putting money into the budget to invest in those activities.
Sure. And you mentioned AI, you mentioned how to monetize it. I guess, however, that lots of people at the moment, teams are leaning into it from a, planning perspective, or from a sales perspective, to try and, I guess, as an adjunct, as an aid for your teams. Is that something that your team in North America and the wider CloserStill teams are doing?
We are not doing it in a formalized way that has
Right.
been rolled out across the globe, but there are pockets of the business that are doing a lot of testing and a lot of leaning in, and we're trying to learn from each other. I suspect that that will come even quicker in 2025, and we'll be more formal about it, sharing best practices and leaning into what's working.
Sure.
Yeah.
And lots of talk about the fact that you don't know anymore what's real and what's not real online. Because of like AI and it's going so
Yep.
quickly. And people I speak to on this podcast and that I read see that actually is a benefit for trade shows because at the moment, if you speak to someone literally at a trade show face to face, it's genuine. Do you agree with that? Do you see that actually AI is not a threat?
Absolutely.
It helps
Absolutely.
us.
Absolutely. We were just having this conversation yesterday. Face to face is the business that we're in. Face to face never goes away. Human interaction never goes away. And it makes our shows and what we do even more valuable. The remote work piece, we were saying relationships have changed. People that you used to work with every day in the office before the pandemic, you had a really strong, close relationship. Now, if you're going in 2 days a week, you don't know what their kids are up to. You don't
Sure.
know if they're engaged. You don't know what's going on in their life. So it becomes a very transactional relationship if you're not face to face. So I believe in it wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I was reading some research actually through TS. They just put some research out from the exhibitor Advocate and Avolio Marketing about the state of the event industry, and specifically about, I'm just reading here, event organizers and the fact there are cost concerns. Maybe there are flat budgets for exhibitors as well for 2025. There's some trust issues around organizers and exhibitors. I don't know if you recognize any of that. And if so, how do you feel that organizers can work better with sponsors and exhibitors at shows?
Yeah, I don't know that we have those issues at
Okay.
CloserStill. They're not front and center for me. I think other things like tariffs, potential tariffs, and those kinds of things are scaring sponsors. But the trust and those things, I don't think we have those issues at Closer
Sure.
Still. Knock on wood. Maybe our shows are, like I said, 4,000 or 5,000 people, maybe 10,000 people most,
Yeah.
and so 2 days. I think that we run really great, effective, efficient shows.
And when you say tariffs, is that through government initiatives?
Yeah. So here in the States, Trump, obviously our president-elect, is very pro-US and pro making products and building everything in the US. So he wants to put tariffs on anything coming into the US. So that makes it very difficult for international exhibitors to sell their products and be competitive in the US if they've got to add, if there's tariff on top of, for their import.
So I guess there have been conversations around Trump's incoming presidential team and how that's going to affect the American business. Would I be correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think, for the most part, without getting into politics, I think he's pro-business.
Yeah.
And we'll just leave it at that.
Okay.
Yeah. That's what people are feeling. He's pro-business.
Sure. That is a good segue, however, to talk about some of your advocacy work. So I know you work heavily within the Exhibitions and Conferences Alliance, the ECA, and also you're on the CISO board, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
How have these roles, how do those organizations help shape government attitudes to industry? Because it may well be what you just said, that they're going to have to do a lot more
So
of that.
ECA was really formed, it's Exhibitions Conference Alliance, and it was formed out of the need for U.S. government to understand the impact of the trade show and event industry on cities, on business, on everything that we do to bring revenue to cities and business, and how important we are in jobs. And so one of the things that they do, well, they identify their priorities every year. A couple of our priorities for 2025 are tax reform, pro-growth, pro-investment, pro-investing in workers. But every year they do a legislative day where members of the industry get together in Washington, D.C., and we go and we meet with and have sit-ins with senators and representatives to talk about what our issues are. And I did that for the first time this past summer in DC. And it was really powerful because actually you're speaking to either the staff or the senator about why we're important. And through those efforts, we've gotten articles in the Wall Street Journal and, major media outlets on how important trade shows are, mostly positive, some of them not not as positive, especially when the pandemic was still going on. Media loves to cover the negative.
Yeah.
But we are now recognized as an industry, and that's really important for when they're, things like, I don't know that you have an equivalent of this over in the UK or Europe, but we have 529 plans where you can save tax-free for college for your kids. Those were only being allowed to be used for college education.
Right.
We're lobbying to say, let them be used for any sort of training or trade education. It could be trade show, it could be whatever. And that looks like that's going to pass, partly because of our efforts, but a lot of people are behind that. So things like that, where we can get young people trained and excited about the event industry to make it a career. If you've done 160 interviews, I'm not sure how many people said I chose the event industry. Most people fell into it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so it'd be great if we could, get them excited about it through training and funded training through 529 plans.
Okay, so that's really exciting for you, I guess, to be involved and actually see some change, because the world of politics, you've got to be really patient, right? And also, people come and go. I guess you might be dealing with different teams one year and different teams another. We definitely had issues in the UK, and the pandemic brought that front and centre that, the UK government didn't really recognise what trade shows or the value of them. And I think it's still sitting within DCMS, which is the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. And it's interesting because then they have their campaigns in the election and they use events. They forget they're actually using events to actually promote themselves. Right. And they like then to talk a keynote speech, a trade show, etc. So it's good to hear that actually that's making a difference. CISO, I think you've got a conference. You have an annual conference, is that right? Every year?
Yeah. CISO is a Society for Independent Show Organizers. It's for-profit show organizers.
Yeah.
There is a CEO level conference in March every year, which most of the major players and major organizers attend. And then there's sponsors there as well. And then it's also a great place because a lot of smaller companies or smaller events are coming there looking to meet people to be acquired. So it's a very good feeding ground for that. Great content, amazing networking. And then they do a leadership conference in the summer, which is meant for, I'll call a level below sea level, although sea level attend because they were mentors for people and things. And that has amazing content, and that sort of exposes the next generation of people in our industry to what's going on out there beyond their day-to-day. So we do really good things. It's a passionate board. It's, and for me, we tend to get stuck in our day-to-day and what needs to be done and what's right in front of us. But when you start going to these events and networking and sharing, and everyone's very open with sharing, you create more relationships. It makes your job more fun. It's more rounded. It's more overall. You're part of an industry, and you're learning from other people. So I really enjoy the extra work that I do outside of my day-to-day. I've always been on boards. I've always volunteered. I've always given back. It's just part of what I think rounds out my day-to-day of just trying to get the numbers in,
I think also, again, for any younger viewers listening in, which I know I have quite a few, it's good to put yourself out there because it's also networking. Let's face it, it's your personal brand. And I guess that could create opportunities for individuals in the future. So I guess you would, always encourage people to get involved in associations within the industry.
Absolutely.
So you've got the conference coming up in March, which is not a million miles away. What do you think are going to be the main discussion points and maybe trends for the next year?
It's a really good question. I have to think that AI is going to be there, driving revenue, audience development. In the United States, there's 3 major cities, Las Vegas, Orlando, Chicago, New York, that the venues are getting very costly. So I know that there's a lot of second tier cities that are trying to be competitive for shows that are, under, I'll call it 10,000 people. So probably venue discussions. Advocacy will be there. They'll probably do a state of the U.S. politics. They'll do probably an economic outlook on what we could expect over the next 12 months in the U.S. It's great. It's one day of content, lots of networking, couple of evening events. It's packed in there, but you come away with a lot of good content and information.
Thank you. Just want to turn our attention for a couple of minutes on leadership and I guess team building. You obviously lead an organization now directly of 100. You said you got 100 staff in North America? there or
Yeah,
thereabouts.
yeah.
You've had leadership positions before. What do you think makes a great leader?
Empathy. I think that's number one. I think a good listener is number two. I think if you are strategic and can get buy-in from your organization on the strategy, but that comes from empathy and listening, because hopefully it's not your strategy top down. It's you've listened to everybody else. We put a strategy in place and now we're rolling it out. And then finally, I'd say being able to make a decision. It doesn't have to always be the right decision. Sometimes the wrong decisions are even better because you learn from them if they're not the right decisions.
Sure.
But being able to make a decision. I mean, how many people have we all worked for that we just want some guidance and we want them to make a decision and tell us where to go? And I've met many people that just can't make a decision. So I think that decision making is really important.
Sure. Cast your mind back to maybe the first ever leadership position that you had. Could have been in the fitness industry or jewelry or your many different guises. How do
Yeah.
you think you've grown and developed as a leader, and why do you think it's important to keep doing that?
I think I've done everything wrong, and I think feedback is a gift.
Right.
And I think probably my early days, I was an individual contributor and not a manager and not a leader. I can get it done. I can figure it out. I know how to do it. But that was at the expense of people. So someone hit me over the head many years ago and pointed that out to me.
Metaphorically, hopefully, not
Metaphorically.
Yeah.
And
okay, interesting.
And then you start to learn, and particularly as you grow, right? You can't do it all yourself.
No.
But when you come from sales, you're an individual contributor, and you're just looking for that contract, and you're looking to looking to get the next dollar in. But you can't. The more you grow, or the more you look for a vision, you can't do it yourself. And so, how do you empower and bring people along with you, and have some fun along the way, and make sure they feel heard and listened to, and they're on board strategically? I think the other thing I've learned is, hire slow and fire faster. You really need to find the right people. And I think I've been in situations where you just need somebody and you hire the wrong person, and you knew when you hired them that wasn't going to be the right fit, and it doesn't work out. So hire slow and fire faster.
Thank you. Any mentors, people that have been of influence to you over your career? How important have they been? And maybe you might want to shout out
so many, but I'll call out a couple.
Yeah.
In the events industry, Saren Bachman was my first boss when I was selling on the jewelry show, and she taught me strategy and listening and follow through, and she was just really great. And then as I grew in the organization, Yancy Walsh, who's now president of Informa Markets, she is one of the best leaders I've ever worked with, in the sense of her empathy is off the charts, and her people skills, and she's just great in all of that. And then Fernando Fisher, my most recent boss at Reed, was really all about structure and vision. So I've had some just really great bosses. I've also had some colleagues along the way that I listen to. I mean, there's Liz Irving over at Clarion. We were on the same team, and I looked to see where she's gone, and probably didn't listen to her enough at the time, but she was so smart. And, just people, I've worked with some really great people. There are too many to name, probably. Yeah. I mean, I think the person, even before the events industry, I had a boss, Robert Bridle. He was the one that said, be patient in your career. So, there's been great people that have just taken an interest and helped me along the way.
Fantastic. And finally, I guess, what do you love most about the trade show and exhibition industry? If someone else was listening and, either considering a career or just started and,
I like the pace of it. It's fast paced for anyone that's listening. I love creating something every year, watching it come to life, and then figuring out how you're going to do it better next year. I love helping the entrepreneurs. Like I said, our 10 by 10 or small exhibitors grow into 10 by 20 or 20 by 20 or larger booths. I love helping them watch them grow their businesses with our platforms. I mean, most of them are small entrepreneurial businesses. I think the event industry is always evolving. So there's always something to learn. Like we were talking about earlier, the experiences, activations, all the new AI tools. I mean, it just never gets dull to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you think 2025 is going to be the year that CloserStill finally sell?
Great question. Who knows? We've been owned by, Providence for, I don't know, 6, 7 years. Private equity normally sells after 5 years or so,
Yeah,
but we had the pandemic. Who knows? I mean, we've done really remarkable things. Watching this company grow and scale just in the 3 years that I've been here has been remarkable. And if we sell, I hope that we get a partner that's going to take us the next 5, 10, 15 years and supports everything that we want to do to go forward.
sure. Good diplomatic answer. Yancy, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Dan. It was
It's
my pleasure.
flowed quickly. We covered a lot. I wish you the very best of luck in the future.
Thank you. You too. And should you get over to New York, hit me up. I'd love to meet you in person.
We'll do.